Thank you and welcome back to the channel. I greatly appreciate your support. For those who already have quail, this may come to you more as a review than anything else, so please, by all means, go ahead and share it with those who do not have quail or are thinking about raising chickens. This particular topic comes to mind due to a lot of the issues that we're seeing here in the United States, especially with gas prices. With gas prices on the rise, we're going to probably be seeing a lot of changes in regards to prices due to other items that stores are now having to supply to us. So as those gas prices go up, those may go up as well. And we're already seeing shortages in other things as well, especially when it comes to like baby formula, tampons, epidurals, maybe even other items that I haven't even heard of. A lot of them are due to recalls, raw material shortages, and even facilities that are going up in flames. Here in the Southwest, we're seeing a potential reality of seeing even further shortages than just that, being water. Here in Arizona, we really don't see very much water or rainfall, and so we depend on a lot of our local reservoirs to be able to help supply water to us. Now, with those droughts being a large concern, a lot of farmers are actually getting impacted due to these shortages because they're now actually cutting off a portion of what they need to supply for their plants and even their livestock. And that can actually be detrimental to us, being us urban farmers or even just us living in the city, because now if they're on short supply of their water, they are going to see less crops and less animals, and we're going to get shorted out in the very end. Now, with all these changes coming into play, are any of us really ready to be able to support ourselves if something like that came to pass? We already saw what happened in 2020 with the toilet paper shortages. Everything was gone. There was nothing on those shelves. We even saw that happen with food. We saw that happen with water, and even eggs disappeared. Now, on the Red Cross website, they actually mentioned how to prepare for emergencies. And one of the things that they state is that being prepared means being equipped with the proper supplies that you need in the event of an emergency or a disaster. Basically, that means that getting all the basic necessities, the day-to-day things, shampoo, toothpaste, soap, medications, to be able to help support you and those that you actually care for. An article written by Elder L. Tom Perry of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he mentioned in the November issue of the Ensign 1995, which is still applicable today, he advised, we are not in a situation that requires panic buying, but we do need to be careful in purchasing and rotating the storage that we are putting away. And this is where we dive into our topic for today. Quail come in many different shapes and sizes around the world. There are domesticated and wild quail. I personally raise jumbo brown quail, also known as the Japanese quail. This variant is a small domesticated bird that actually produces eggs every day, just like a chicken does. Some of the relatives may be that you've heard of as the bob white, the Gambel's quail, or even the button quail. Others may be familiar with the actual name from the Bible, where God provided this particular animal to the Israelites while they were spending their time in the wilderness. Others may have actually come across this when it's flying across the road, or even seen a covey of them, maybe like 5 of them or whatever, just darting across the sidewalk path as you're taking your stroll. Why should you be invested in quail? That is a great question that a lot of people are asking. I even asked myself that before I even started quail. I had chickens at the time. Thought it was an okay idea, thought it would be interesting, but never really gave it much thought. So, those who are wanting to raise chickens, have you considered getting quail? Do you live in an HOA where they do not allow you to have any kind of chickens due to the noise, maybe even the smell? Maybe you don't really have a large backyard, or even you have a small patio and you just don't have the room to facilitate raising a chicken. Maybe you just want to be able to save some money in regards to getting eggs from your own local flock instead of buying them from the store every single week. Maybe you just want to have the comfort of knowing exactly what is being fed into those eggs, or even into the meat if you decide to go ahead and use your quail for meat purposes. Maybe you have some food allergies and you can't have chicken eggs. I've heard that quail eggs are very beneficial for those kind of people. Perhaps you're trying to feed a pet, maybe like a lizard or a snake. It's an alternative to be able to feed them those quail eggs as an alternate food source. So here's the general takeaway. Quail don't take up very much room. They take roughly about 3/4 of a foot, a square foot. So it's going to be 8 inches by 8 inches. The smallest that you probably want to have them in for space-wise is probably a 6 inches by 6 inches, which is half a square foot. But again, they don't take up very much room compared to a chicken. Another thing to also keep in mind is that their laying period is going to be roughly about 2 to maybe 3 years. And the eggs themselves are going to be very, very small. So they don't take up very much room in the fridge, but you can get special cartons for them in 12 count or 18 count. Just don't keep them on that top shelf where the cold air is blowing out, because it can cause them to freeze and to expand and crack, and they may not be any good after that point. Another point to consider is their growth cycle from the time that they hatch, from the time that they lay their first egg, which is about 8 to 9 weeks or 65 days, which is incredibly fast compared to that of a chicken, which is about 6 to maybe even 8 months before you can actually see your first egg. When they're about 4 to 5 weeks old, that's when you can actually start feather sexing them. For the quail, for the male, it's going to be a brown chest for the male. For the female, they're going to have speckles already on there, but they're going to become a lot more accented. So you're going to actually really be able to see those spots on their chest, and that's when you can start telling the differences at 4 to 5 weeks. If you ever do need to kill any of the quail for any reason, it's very, very quick to be able to replace them, as, again, it only takes 8 to 9 weeks for them to be able to start laying their eggs again. So if you ever need to eat one of them, or even a couple of them, let's just say that you had 6, you can still be able to get a decent amount of eggs out of those others, even though you've had to sacrifice those 2. Whereas if you sacrifice a chicken, you completely lose out on all of those eggs that she would have produced, and it does take a long time for her to get replaced, unless you just want to go ahead and fork out a lot of money to buy her when she's already laying her eggs. Another thing to keep in mind is the quail meat has higher protein than the chicken does. So you may not be able to eat as much of that as a chicken would, because it's going to have more protein in it. You're probably going to get more full faster. Chickens, in comparison to quail, are a lot noisier. Chickens love to announce that they lay eggs, which is another reason why HOAs probably do not want them, is so that it stops bothering all your neighbors by not having any kind of chickens. Whereas quail are very quiet. The loudest that you're probably going to hear them is no more than someone talking. The female quail usually make a small chirping noise, which I found kind of sounds like a frog croaking, but it's very, very quiet, even quieter than someone talking. Whereas the male quail, it makes a loud shrill. It's very short, but it sounds like a rooster crowing at 10 times speed. Overall, the size of the jumbo brown quail is about the size of a softball. So in comparison to that 6 inches, it's going to be about this big. They're really not that large. So one thing to consider when it comes to egg math is that chickens and quail may not lay every single day. On average, I've gotten about 6 eggs every single week. Sometimes I get lucky and I get 7 eggs, but about 5 to 6 eggs is probably about a good average that you can expect out of them. Now, one quail themselves will lay about 260 eggs in 1 year of hatching. So that's roughly about 65 chicken eggs. Hens will lay about 100 eggs within their first year. So within the time that the chicken is still maturing, the quail can lay at least 35 quail eggs before that hen will lay her first egg. The cost of maintaining the quail is very, very low. There really isn't any kind of special kind of food that you need to feed them, although there are some that will say that, but I prefer to give them the laying feed that I give my chickens, so that way they can still be able to produce as well, and it keeps their eggs just as strong. One thing that I found is that quail love lettuce as well as milkweed plants as a treat. There's probably some other things that they love, but I just really haven't discovered into that yet. So for the chickens, usually I've gotten the pellets, but for these quail, because they're a little bit smaller, I've noticed that they didn't like those pellets, and so I've been feeding them the crumbles. But if you can give them the smaller version of the pellets, they'll probably just eat that just fine, and that'll help sustain your quail as it provides the nutrients that they need. For my quail, when I first started, I had about 6 quail, and a 50-pound bag of crumbles lasted them close to about 6 months. Now the prices may fluctuate with eggs. So prices may fluctuate and the eggs may actually become scarce, as we noticed back in 2020. So it's probably a good idea to consider getting quail, just so that way you can be able to even sell or barter the eggs for anything that you need. For a 50-pound bag of crumble here in Arizona, I've noticed that I can get it for about $22. And with those 6 months and those 6 quail that I had, I earned approximately 1,000 quail eggs. And that's about 250 chicken eggs worth of eggs in 6 months. So that's about 9 cents an egg. Whereas if you compare it to a chicken egg from the store, so let's just say that the eggs there at the store are $3 for 12 eggs, that's about 25 cents an egg. So let's just say that you had to invest in 26 cartons, so 1 egg a week, or 1 carton a week for those 6 months. That's a total of 312 chicken eggs. And you're spending $78 on all that. Since we're still talking about the eggs, I've had a couple of people ask me, are quail eggs healthier than chicken eggs? I wish I could say that I'm a nutrition expert, but I am not that by any means. But I did find some information that I'll go ahead and post on the video right now, so that way you can go ahead and take a look at those details, and I'll just pause it for a second. For those that are now interested in raising quail for themselves, the first thing that you do want to determine is how many eggs do you need. So on average, like I mentioned, you can get close to maybe even 5 to 6 eggs from 1 quail per week. My quails currently lay about 12-gram eggs, so that is about a ratio of 4 to 1. So 4 quail eggs for 1 chicken egg, that's about 50 grams. Once you determine how many eggs that you need, now you need to decide on how big of a cage that you're going to get. So if you're going to take 5 quail, they need roughly about 3/4 of a square foot. You're going to probably need about 4 square feet, which is 2 feet by 2 feet for a cage. So you're looking at something about this big for maybe 5 quail. I wish I could say that I could be able to make this fit on screen perfectly, but I'm sure you get the idea. 2 feet here, 2 feet there, and really nothing any higher than 16 inches. Quail do love to jump, so you want to prevent them from jumping, so you want to make sure that that top of the cage is as low as possible. That way they don't hurt their heads and cause any kind of damage or kill themselves. The cage itself can come in any shape or size. One, you can order it from somewhere. You could have someone custom make one for you, or you could even make one yourself. Heck, it could even be an old rabbit cage, it could be a terrarium, it could be an old bird cage. If you don't want to go that route, you're more than welcome to actually create a big pen, like a chicken coop, but just go ahead and use that 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch hardware cloth, just so that nothing can get in and they can't get out. Many of these quail can be found online. You can pre-order them as eggs. Some maybe even ship them out as chicks, but I'm sure that you can find them in a local feed store. I know that there's a couple here in Arizona that do it. Otherwise, Craigslist may be your best option. I'm sure that there's probably other places that you can find them, but those are just some of the places that I've seen that do offer quail. For your quail to be able to start laying their eggs, you actually don't need a rooster. And this is actually fairly common, so you're not the only one that's actually thinking this. They do not need a rooster whatsoever to lay their eggs. They only need them to be able to create fertilized eggs for hatching. Now that you've decided what kind of cage that you want, the real decision is whether you keep them inside or out. If you keep them outside, just make sure that they are in a shaded area. They do overheat very, very quickly, so even adding a fan inside of that area is going to be very beneficial for them. If you decide to keep them in a coop, just make sure that you're using that hardwire cloth, that 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch, just to make sure that nothing gets in and that they don't get out. But if you do go inside of there, just make sure that you look on the ground, because they may at first lay their eggs everywhere until they decided on a nesting spot, and then it might be a little more consistent on where you collect your eggs. I've had a couple people even ask me, well, can I let my quail free range out in my backyard? I wouldn't really recommend it, because I don't know if they'll have the tendency to fly off. Even though they don't really fly, they can fly. They may fly off. Otherwise, you may have a animal like a cat, raccoon, or whatever you have in your area. They might find them and have them as a snack. So keeping them in a cage is probably going to be the best option for that, or that coop. Now, if you don't want to keep them outside and you want to keep them inside, just know that they will make a mess. Food and poop are going to get everywhere, so you'll probably want to have a tray underneath them to collect as much as possible, and to change out that tray and bedding at least every single week. That way it eliminates those odors and you can keep the area generally clean. Now, when keeping them inside, you are going to want to have a light. So if you want to get one of those little timers that you can set, so that way it turns on a certain time and turns off, they are going to need at least 12 to 18 hours of that light. That way they can be able to maintain their production to their peak as much as possible. Now, if you do want to go ahead and keep them outside, I do have a video here that you can look at on how to be able to get those things set up. So, when should you consider getting your quail? Now is actually probably the best time to start talking about it, so that way you can prepare for it. If you can afford it now, by all means, go ahead and invest in your quail. So, as a recap, you'll want to determine how many quail that you need, either for the meat that you're going to put away in your freezer, and or how many eggs that you and your family are going to need and use. Determine where they are going to stay. You'll want to make a decision if you're going to either buy or build the cage that you need for said quail. Now, if you're going to go ahead and buy that cage, it can be a lot cheaper than the one building it, but if you want good quality, you could probably just buy it from someone or have somebody make it for you. You'll also want to consider buying their feed and watering trays as well. If you're going to buy out the quail instead of incubate them, you'll want to get them between 1 and 5 weeks. That's when it's going to be the cheapest to be able to buy them. If you decide to incubate them, I know I didn't mention this before, but starting up with an incubator can range between $150 to even $300. But the benefit behind that is that now you can hatch as many quail as you want any time of the year. Whereas if you're waiting for the quail to go ahead and sit on those eggs, you're going to have to wait for Mother Nature to take that course, and that can take time. Otherwise, if you do go ahead and buy them, you can determine with confidence that if you get them at 5 weeks, you'll be able to know what gender they are based on their feathers. But overall, enjoy them in the fruits of your labor.